Welcome to Back to Iacon, a new show on moving pictures highlighting an even older show of Transformers. I want to highlight a couple things before we get started. This is not a sequel show or a successor to Beast Wars Wednesday. That show was very much the voice of two people. This is very much just my voice, Decepticon Doug, as I review every episode of the original G1 Transformers. So very similar in concept, but extremely different in design. This is more of a stopgap between Beast Wars Wednesday and Beast Machines Monday. This show is designed to be a little bit more direct and not dive in as deep as those shows, though I do hope to provide any insight where I can. This show is actually going to be scripted, which again is very different from Beast Wars Wednesday, which was just made up on the spot. This is a very different experience as such. It's also a very different experience for me editing it, because it means that I don't have to worry about tangents and my own stuttering to have to deal with. It's also worth noting that the scoring system is relative to the show we're in, so since I've made it known that I prefer Beast Wars over Transformers G1, a 5-star G1 episode is not the same quality as a 5-star Beast Wars episode. It's just not a fair playing field otherwise. If all Transformers shows were judged equally, it would just seem like I'm constantly trashing the G1 show, which I don't want to do because I actually have a fondness for it. It's just a product of its time, and the standard of the era was not the same as it was even just 10 years later. With all that out of the way, let's talk about More Than Meets the Eye, the 3-part pilot of the original Transformers show. More Than Meets the Eye begins with Wheeljack and Bumblebee, out on a covert mission to retrieve Energon. But they really only came out with scraps, better than nothing. But this is actually clever in how, without overly saying it, it already shows the catalyst for the events that will unfold. They need Energon, and it's becoming more and more scarce. And in another nice touch, we get to see both Wheeljack and Bumblebee transform into their Cybertronian vehicle forms. I always loved this as a kid because, of course, they wouldn't have any forms that looked like Earth vehicles because they've never been to Earth, and this is millions of years in the past, before those vehicles were ever made. The creative team could have put no thought into it and go like, whatever, kids are dumb. But they decided to create alternate modes for these two, some of the Jets, Jazz, Soundwave, and Laserbeak for single appearances. That's a lot of work for what is essentially details, but I always appreciated it. Not to mention that it would be a precedent for future Transformer stories in later media that take place on Cybertron. So after a chase scene between some Decepticon troops and the two Autobot scouts, Jazz comes to Iacon and reports to Optimus Prime. Things aren't looking good. The war effort has drained Cybertron of its resources, and Prime doesn't think either side will survive the war, never mind win it. So he gets a crew together to go on a search for Energon elsewhere. It really is their only chance. Well, sadly, Autobot security took the day off, and Laserbeak is spying on their conversation. He reports back to Megatron, who has a ship ready just for such an event. Before they leave, Starscream shows a bit of insubordination and tells Megatron that he would be a better leader than he is, which Megs, of course, brushes away. He sends Shockwave a goodbye kiss, and they chase the Autobots in pursuit. These two ships, of course, wind up being important to Transformers mythos, as the Autobot ship, the Ark, will be the main base of operations through the series. The Decepticon ship, the Nemesis, will actually be forgotten through the series, and only brought back in Beast Wars when it's found by Tarantulas and commandeered by that era's Megatron. But of course, that's a story for another episode, one that we've actually already done, so there. So on their way to wherever they're going, the Autobots narrowly miss two colliding asteroids, which takes up their attention and hides the Decepticon vessel as it approaches. Megatron and company board the ship, and here's one of the first of many animation errors that would become infamous through the series. Optimus Prime announces that they're being boarded, and so we get a snippet of animation that correlates with that.
They're coming aboard! Prepare for battle!
Then Megatron says Decepticons attack, and either they used the wrong animation clip or there just wasn't the proper animation to go with it, but they just wind up using the exact same clip. So now we have Optimus telling the Decepticons to attack his own crew. How mistakes like this come to be is beyond me, but I mean, obviously I'm not an animator. Anyway, in the ensuing battle, the Ark spirals out of control and crash lands on Earth several million years in the past. Both sides are knocked unconscious in what would come to be known as stasis lock, until the volcano erupts and activates the repair bot many years later. It repairs Skywarp, turning him into an Earth jet, and he sets up his fellow Decepticons to be repaired as well. They leave the Ark and start their quest to get more Energon and build a ship to return to Cybertron to finish the war. Starscream, of course, loves to have the final say and starts shooting the mountain just for fun. He winds up knocking Optimus Prime into a repair beam, and it builds him into a semi-truck. He transforms back into robot mode and goes, Man, I've got a splitting headache. Anyone else dream about a crazy purple dinosaur? With all other Autobots repaired, he sends Cliffjumper and Hound to scout things out and find the Decepticons, who have set up camp elsewhere to build themselves a new starship to return to Cybertron with a stockpile of Energon. When the two Autobots find the base, they take the scouting assignment a bit too seriously as Cliffjumper decides that he's going to assassinate Megatron. I mean, I can see why they'd want to put an end to the war right then and there, but alas, here was the original artwork for Cliffjumper. He misses the shot, and Soundwave sends out Laserbeak to gun down the Autobot threat. They split up so that one of them can definitely report back to Prime, but Cliffjumper just gets a flying laser gun which he promptly disposes of, and Hound gets gunned down by Laserbeak. Man, I'm starting to think that that crazy bird is the most reliable Decepticon in the fleet. Seriously, guys, put up some chicken wire around the Ark because that thing is a menace. Cliffjumper comes back with Ratchet and Hauler, who get Hound back to the base, and their exchange is friendly enough, but if I were Hound, I might be inclined to report Cliffjumper to Prime for endangering their position because the Decepticons wouldn't have known the Autobots were even awake yet if not for that bot shot. Seriously, the tides really would have been turned if the Autobots were able to maintain the element of surprise. And wait a second. Who the heck is Hauler? This guy is literally only in this one scene and he doesn't even get to transform. Seriously, he's never seen again. It's like he pulled Hound up the cliff and it warmed out so he exploded off camera. The Decepticons decide to raid an oil rig and mess up a bunch of oil workers and start fueling up their Energon cubes. Here's where we meet Sparkplug and Spike Witwicky, a father and son with a family tradition of giving their offspring ridiculous names. My dad's name is Railhole. The Autobots come in and engage the Decepticons, but eventually Megs makes off with the Energon and blasts the oil rig, doing irreparable damage to the environment by spilling a bunch of oil in the ocean. Oh, and the humans are in danger too. Back to Iacon will return after these messages. We now return to Back to Iacon. Part 2 begins with Huffer trapped in some metal with Brawn coming over to save him. If you don't recognize Huffer, it's because this is the first scene with him in it, apart from a blink and you'll miss it group shot from the last episode. This is the beginning of another Transformers tradition, where characters are brought in seemingly out of nowhere and without any explanation. The Autobots use all their special powers to put out the flames and rescue the people, which is great for making nice with all the natives of the planet. Spike and Sparkplug do wind up being mainstays through most of the series. They would become the Autobots' primary human connection. Spike, most of all, serves as the avatar for the viewer because he's a kid. You know, one of those young teens who helps their dad in oil rigs. This sets up another tradition of the Transformers series, both old and new. There is often a young human companion who inexplicably joins these giant robots in their interplanetary war, and the parents often turn a blind eye to it. Oh, that's great, dear. I'm just glad you're finally making some friends. This one definitely has his dad's approval, at least. Hey, Spike, if we die together. Yeah, haha, sure thing, Dad. Anyway, everyone makes it out okay, and Spike starts to write about the Autobots in his diary, just like Doug Funny. He stumbles upon a cassette player and brings it to the base because he's the only one dumb enough to do that in the story. Soundwave transforms and lets Ravage out to download some information from the Ark's mainframe. Spike talks with the Autobots about what their lives are like, and Hound and Mirage introduce their Chekhov's gun special powers since they will come in handy later. And Spike goes for a joyride with Hound, and they talk a bit about their respective homeworlds. And for a bit there, it looked like Hound and Spike were to become good friends, though not too far into the series, the role of Spike's friend would be given to Bumblebee, and Hound would take a backseat for much of the show. When Spike strolls back, he catches Soundwave and naturally freaks out, and he sounds the alarm. Soundwave and Ravage make a break for it, but the Autobots pursue, eventually caging Ravage, but Soundwave does get away. He passes the information over to Megatron, and they learn that energy can be harvested through a nearby dam. Of course, not enough to fuel their war, so they're going to have to create a tidal wave that will flood it and overload it with energy. That's where Rumble, one of Soundwave's cassette goons, comes in. He goes to the bottom of the river and starts thumping, which I guess starts some flooding. The rest of the Decepticons barge in and take over the dam, leaching Energon into their cubes. The Autobots show up and begin Project Stop Megatron from Doing Stuff Again. Hound goes into the water to fight Rumble, and so they start fighting. Now, it was established earlier that Rumble was about human-sized, and here he's only a bit smaller than Hound because I guess they wanted a fair fight. Scaling has always been an issue in Transformers, but something about this one really bugs me. Rumble wins the Rumble. The rest of the Autobots fight the Decepticons, and Prime and Megatron wind up fighting on the dam. This is one of the most iconic fight scenes from the whole series, and I remember after I first saw this oh so many years ago, this was the part that I always thought of. It helps that Optimus and Megatron fight with energy weapons, an axe and a flail respectively, which has found its way into a lot of toys including the Masterpiece figures, despite these features not showing up much more in future episodes. But I think what works about this scene so much is that it represents the basic concept of the Transformers so well. Two giants who stand on a man-made world, fighting for its extermination or survival. Neither faction meant to be here, but here they are, and humankind and our whole culture are caught up in the crossfire. Our technological breakthroughs, our ability to harvest the planet's resources, all that could be taken away by Megatron. He and his army would pillage us dry, and there wouldn't be much we could do about it, because their very being is in and of itself superior to any technology we possess. The only thing between them and us is Optimus Prime and his Autobots. And with Earth's resources at their disposal, they are evenly matched, destined to fight each other until only one of them is still standing. Anyway, Spike gets in trouble and ruins everything. With that battle represented everything that really worked in Transformers, this more or less summarizes one of the big flaws of the series. Spike is a dumb kid, and he has no business being involved with any of this. He is so clearly in over his head, but so eager to help, that he couldn't even see the flaw in his plan of tackle Rumble. Because it doesn't take a chess master to see that the next move after tackle Rumble is Rumble then severs his spinal cord. So the human element of the show, especially the young human element, is understandable. This is a show and toy line marketed towards kids, and so Spike is more or less a vessel for the kids to imagine their own adventures with the Transformers. He brings humanity to the show, so to speak. But the problem with this is that the Transformers are so much bigger and stronger than any human. Never mind a 15-year-old. So he really can't contribute in any meaningful way, so he just gets in trouble and needs rescuing. Or in this case, he even distracts Optimus and gets him hit off the dam, ensuring victory for the Decepticons. So that's what, Decepticons 2, Autobots 0? The dam breaks and the Autobots do some damage control and go home to lick their wounds. But they do get to work to figure out the next plan of the Decepticons as Spike, Sparkplug, and Tailbreaker go on a recon mission to get the sick deets of Megatron's next plan. He had to explain it to Starscream because he was being dumb and used some of the Energon to shoot a laser at nothing. I get it though. There was a giant gun just sitting there, so why would you not? The Decepticons' next plan is to raid a mine that's full of rubies. Apparently, rubies can be converted to Energon, so that's cool. I wonder how much rocket fuel my rose quartz can convert to. The Autobots go to stop them again, but this time their plan is to bury the Decepticons by blowing up the mountain and causing a cave-in. Sparkplug was also a miner at one point because he has a hard hat, and so he's done all the hard hat jobs. So he and Bumblebee go in to blow the mine up with a bomb supplied by Wheeljack. They plant the bomb, but are stopped from escaping by Thundercracker and Skywarp, who push them around and laugh about it because they're assholes. It's taken long enough for them to return that Optimus gets a bit worried and decides to head up there, sending in his own personal R2-D2 to investigate. But as he's up there, the bomb goes off and he's blasted down the hill. Back to Iacon will return after these messages. We now return to Back to Iacon. Part 3 begins with Optimus going ouch and getting back up with some cheering from the other Autobots. He's okay, but it was a pretty cool shot for the cliffhanger, right? So it was totally worth it. They dig up Bumblebee and Sparkplug from the rubble, and they're fine, so no harm, no foul. Plus, the Decepticons are trapped under the rock, presumably forever, so I'm just kidding. They just blast their way out and take the Energon with them. Prime doesn't feel like flying anymore, so he decides not to pursue them. Ironhide, on the other hand, just takes off against orders. Bluestreak chases after him, but Ironhide opens fire, hitting Skywarp, who asks Megatron to counterattack. Funny that the Decepticons respect the chain of command more than the Autobots do. Well, with the obvious exception, of course, Starscream and all. Skywarp teleports and shoots Ironhide down. He must have been shot so hard that it knocked out the flying ability out of all the Autobots, because I'm pretty sure that's the last we'll see any of them flying. Now, not to take us aside too much, but can we address the insubordination for a second? Now, I'm not one to go questioning the wisdom of Optimus Prime here, but are you serious? Listen to how Optimus Prime reacts when Ironhide disobeys a direct order.
At least you can still talk, old buddy. You gave us all a pretty good scare.
Yeah, it's like a parent who is just like, oh, he's just that way, there's nothing we can do. Yes, there is, you can discipline him. Right now, the Decepticons are 3 for 3, and Ironhide's stupidity nearly cost you one of your valuable troops. Meanwhile, I'm sorry for the comparison, but here's the Beast Wars pilot showing what happens when Rat Trap only almost disobeys Optimus Primal's orders to stand down from attacking Dinobot.
Ease off, Rat Trap. It was an accident.
Says you!
That's right, says me. You want to question my orders one more time?
Yeah, he sure takes that insubordination seriously because it's a war zone with limited troops and you need everyone to be on the same page and coordinate. Prime, just give him a spanking or something. Back at the base, Hound and Mirage are harassing Ravage, who is stuck in his cage. Hound, well, stuck in a confusing animation error, makes a fake Megatron hologram, and that gives him an idea. He goes to tell Prime that he wants to make a hologram of a rocket base to trick the Decepticons, and Prime is like, well, I guess we should do something. So Mirage and Hound talk about a plan very openly in front of Ravage, and then drops the key to his cage. Naturally, Ravage makes a break for it, and the Autobots fail to capture him. But don't worry, what looks like gross incompetence is actually part of their plan. You wouldn't know by looking at their faces, though. Ravage passes the plan along to Megatron, and Starscream uses that moment to try and overthrow Megatron and shoot him. He fails, of course, and Megatron shoots him back. See, Prime, that's how you handle insubordination. They go to attack the rocket base hologram, but the Decepticons fall to pieces as the Autobots engage them. Turns out they were decoy robots and the real Decepticons are attacking a real rocket base. They get more energon and that means the score is Decepticons 4, Autobots 0. Yikes. The Autobots get ready to charge into battle and I love this moment where Prime asks for volunteers and it looks like only Hound and Ironhide step forward along with Spike and Sparkplug. Apparently they all stepped up, but that's all that's shown. The heroism of the team in that moment was kind of lost if you don't actually show them stepping forward. It's fine, whatever. They transform and roll out and engage the Decepticons. They fight and Prime almost has Megatron beat, except Ravage, of all characters, takes him down. Ravage, who is about the size of a human, jumps onto Optimus Prime, who is the size of a semi-truck, and knocks him over. Okay. The Decepticons pile onto their ship, leaving the Autobots behind, and just to add insult to injury, I hear Skywarper's taking a library book with him, and has no plans to come back and return it. Maybe that's a dated joke, but hey, you know what? If you're watching a Transformers G1 retrospective, you must have been to the library back in the day. Not to let Megatron go so easy, Prime takes Sideswipe's rocket pack because that's something that he had this whole time, and he flies up to engage the ship. Unfortunately, he's gunned right out of the sky and he falls, crashing to the ground, curiously enough, taking even less damage than when he was tumbling down that hill. Megatron is victorious, except Starscream takes the opportunity to usurp Megatron by giving him a very long speech. And to be fair, listening to Starscream blather on about how it's his time and how good a Decepticon he is might be enough to put a gun to my own head. I don't even have a gun, but with Megatron's arm having a gun built in, I'm willing to bet that Starscream was gambling that old Megs might just pull the trigger and do the dirty work for him. But the real threat shows up first. Mirage used that invisibility power to sneak on board to shoot the ships down from the inside out. He became visible to do it, so I'm guessing he's like a Klingon bird of prey and can't fire when cloaked. Starscream shoots him, and instead of addressing the Autobot on board, Megatron guns down Starscream. You know what, actually that checks out. I'd probably do the same. But it's too late and the Decepticon ship has taken too much damage and it's going to crash. Mirage ditches the ship in the confusion, and fortunately he has a parachute built in, so he takes a much more gentle descent than Prime and Ironhide. Those things should start being standard issue. So the Autobots win despite the score being, 6-1 for the Decepticons? There's a quaint little epilogue about Earth uniting to help the Autobots out to get their butts back to Cybertron. But of course, if this were to happen today, no one would unite and we'd just have one side wanting to help them, one side wanting to arrest them for entering the country illegally, and a few people who just wouldn't believe that they're there and would call the Autobots a liberal hoax. After all, have you ever actually seen one in real life? And of course, that footage has been doctored, and come on, stop being a sheeple. Oh yeah, and of course the Decepticons are alive and well because, hey, we need to make this into a series, damn it. More Than Meets the Eye is a fairly decent pilot for an above-average kids cartoon from the 80s. For the uninitiated, it's probably not gonna make you want to become a hardcore Transformers fan, but for kids of the 80s, it was a hit for sure. This was originally slated to be just a 3-part miniseries, but they knew they had a hit on their hands, so before it even aired, they greenlit the show for a whole season, which would of course expand into several more seasons, and even a theatrically released movie. And it's easy to see why. The premise was solid and had a great infrastructure to expand on through the many toys slated to come out. I really enjoy the events on Cybertron and the story of what brought them to Earth. The character designs are mostly very good, often making really messy figures like Ironhide and Ratchet into much more coherent looking characters. If anything, those toys were probably huge disappointments for someone who started off as a fan of the show. The character stuff between Hound and Spike is all good. The scene where they are sharing a bit about their planets is brief, but actually helps bring the story back down to Earth. Having those character beats is important in getting us invested in the story. And well, people tend to give Megatron some flack for keeping Starscream around for his insubordination. In the context of this 3-part pilot, it works because the story does end with Starscream being shot down by Megatron. It's all the times where he puts up with Starscream after this, which make a lot less sense. But of course there are problems, and I think that most hardcore Transformer fans can take off their nostalgia goggles long enough to admit that. The primary issue I have with this pilot is that there really was only enough story for 2 episodes. After that initial setup, the story more or less goes through the same motions of Megatron goes to get Energon, and the Autobots try to stop him, but it doesn't work. The story doesn't have a good flow because the actions of these various battles and set pieces don't really have any consequences. Good writing sees cause and effect. It should be like, this happens, so this happens, so this happens. But rather, these episodes play out like, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. It's just weak storytelling, hate to say. And frankly, it makes the Autobots look incompetent. There's only so many times you can watch your heroes fail completely before you think, I'm starting to see why the Decepticons were winning this war. The actions of the Autobots should make impact on Megatron's plan and force him to approach things differently next time, at the very least. I mean, what does it say when Starscream does a better job at setting back the Decepticons in their quest than the Autobots do? Without him, the Autobots would have lost for sure. Anyway, there's enough that works here, and it is important to see because it does set the stage up for the first 2 seasons. So I'm going to give it 3.5 out of 5. A good setup for the series for its concept and characters, even if it does have a clunky plot and a lot of filler.